Oi oi, it's your boy. The Elite XC presents King of the Streets Kimbo of Wishing You a Merry Crimbo. Jack Slack is the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on the very first day of 2024. Start as you mean to proceed, so I'm full of energy, piss and vinegar, and I'm ready to tell you about some fights that you probably didn't watch. The Rising card, that was what was going on over the weekend. Rising obviously do like 3 events a year. And it's worked out pretty well for them. You know, it's they outlasted Bellator, pending Bellator continuing under PFL but being called Bellator. Yes, someone asked what your achievements were last year, and I said killing Bellator was one of mine. Through accurate coverage, through being one of the only people actually talking about Bellator. But Rising 45 was, good. I mean, it carries on the grand tradition of Japanese New Year's Eve MMA, which goes back to Pride and K1. In fact, it was Pride Shockwave 2003 was the first New Year's Eve card, which is quite impressive because Pride had been going since 1997. So it was, and it wound up in 2007. So basically halfway through its run, they started doing New Year's Eve MMA. But then Dream continued on New Year's Eve. Yaranoka was the bridge between the two companies. That was on New Year's Eve. It's just become part of the tradition. And Rising, I think, has done New Year's Eve every year since they started. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, they actually did 9 events this year because, of course, they also have their landmark cards. And there's another one called like a Rising Trigger or something like that, which isn't included in this. But that's like Road to Rising. But this was their 60th event, so well done to them. But their very first card was a double card, which was December 29th and December 31st. I remember that. That was weird. And then they did Rising one after that. So, yeah, they've been around for a while. They've actually been around, well, this is their 9th year. So they're catching up on Pride, which was only around 10 years. But they serve an important role. And I've been flippant about them in the past. But, since one of my themes this episode is going to be things that I learned this year. And at the start of this year, I said, I'm going to make a commitment to watching more alternate MMA and watching more kickboxing, J-kick, boxing, not Muay Thai, but one Muay Thai, just anything else that's on. I'll give it a watch and I'll try and cover it fairly. And that was in response to the UFC just basically 50% of their output was Drek last year. And to be honest, this year as well. Well, no, we're talking about last year now. So the year before, 2022 was NAF. So I learned a lot watching the new upcoming fighters in boxing and getting into J-kick for the first time. And Rising was one of the pleasant surprises because one of the things about Rising cards is they're always full of guys who have like an 0-2 record versus another guy who's got a 1-3 record. And you're going, what on earth is that? And it's because there's this crossover in Japanese combat sports. For a great example is someone like Ren Hiromata, who is shit hot. He's an incredible kickboxer. He has like an amateur win over Tenshin Nasukawa. He was a runner-up in one of the K1 Grand Prix. He's really good. And he decided to move to MMA. And unlike a few of the other guys, he hasn't ever gone back. He's been in his last kickboxing match was in 2019. 2020, he starts MMA, loses his first 2, wins his next 2, loses his last one by close split decision. Then he fights Yaman on this or Yaman, whatever we're calling him, on this card. But he's so much better than that record indicates, and because he's got such a sort of one element skill set, he's a much better fighter than you would see on like a regional MMA card in the US, where it's a 2-2 MMA fighter on the King of the Cage card or whatever. It's just going to be some guy. Ren Hiromata, very legit. There are still other guys on this card that weren't super anything, but there is sort of like a little backstory to a lot of the people on the card who don't really have much experience. And of course, it's Japan, so there are some freak fights. The Seika Iizawa versus Miyu Yamamoto fight, completely unnecessary, but we'll get into that in a second. But the main event was Kyoji Horiguchi versus Makoto Shinryu, who apparently not his name. Makoto Takahashi is his name, but he's billed as Shinryu. And this was really interesting because Kyoji Horiguchi has been the best fighter that Japan's ever produced, really. Maybe not the most significant because you've got people like Sakuraba, who obviously stands astride this sport as a very important historical figure in the same way that someone like Hoist Gracie was. But in terms of like skill, it's Kyoji Horiguchi, and then it's miles between him and the next guy. And he had a bit of a weird UFC career because he won some kind of, I think, he didn't quite get the Shuto title, but then he came to the UFC and he fought a couple of times on undercards. He fought Louis Gadineau, who was famous for having green hair and nothing else, on I think it was an undercard in Northern Ireland or something. And then he was fighting Demetrius Johnson for the title in his next fight. And it was the perfect example of how, even if you think that because Demetrius Johnson is a boring person, he was unpromotable, they did nothing to build his opponents. And they'd rush them, and he'd beat them so quick that they were rushing guys through as well. They never built anyone up. They could have had someone on the back burner while he was beating the John Moragas of the world, but they never really worked out what they were doing. The whole division was just a mess. So Kyoji Horiguchi gets catapulted into this title fight really early. And there's moments where he looks a bit tricky on the feet, because he is lightning fast. He has this very strange style where he stands at extreme range and either bursts in or lets you come in on him and meets you halfway. And those were interesting moments, but then he just got ragdolled by DJ. And it was sort of like most people saw that part coming, because in basically every fight of his UFC career to that point, even when he was styling on people, he was giving up his back for half the round and ending up with the opponent on his back along the fence being a backpack and not able to get out. He had some real problems with his grappling. So then he moved to American Top Team. And if you've heard someone like Jorge Masvidal called him the most talented guy in the room, when he was asked about who's the best fighter, who are the best fighters in American Top Team, because it's so stacked with talent. And American Top Team taught him to wall walk, which he used successfully in his last couple of UFC fights. Didn't give up his back so easily. Looked phenomenal. Beat the piss out of Chico Camus and Neil Siri. And then Ali Bagautinov was his last one. And Bagautinov had just fought for the title. He made him look like shit. And then the UFC didn't sign him again. And it was just a case of we don't see what we could do with you. So he ended up going back to Rizin for Rizin 5. He's 19-2. He's 20-something years old. And he just goes on this run. And the key point is that he's a flyweight who, for the last 7 years, has been fighting at bantamweight, including the Rizin Bantamweight Grand Prix, where he fought once on the 29th of December and then twice in the same night on New Year's Eve. And he finished 3 guys, including Manel Kape. Probably his best win in that time, though, is Darian Caldwell, who was the Bellator champion. They brought him over for Rizin 14. He was a smothering wrestler, a really lanky guy who just smothered people. And he held Kyoji down, or tried to hold Kyoji down, and Kyoji wall walked in a ring, which was really incredible. They all try it, and they all do it against the ring posts, despite people insisting that the ring makes that impossible. But Kyoji was doing it on the ring ropes, which was really impressive. And eventually, Caldwell was just trying to keep him down so hard that he stuck his head in the hole and got guillotined. But at Rizin 18 in 2019, he got knocked out by Kai Asakura in a bit of a shock. Kai Asakura is a huge star for Rizin because he's always been a fighter. He was a fighter in Road FC, which is a Korean organization. And he had a YouTube channel that did amazingly well in Japan. He's got 3 million subscribers. And so is his brother Mikuru. So that's why they often end up headlining cards for Rizin. But it was still a bit of a shock when Asakura caught him. So Kyoji takes a year off because he's been fighting non-stop, comes back, batters Asakura, then goes to Bellator, puts on the performance of his life, embarrassing Sergio Pettis for the best part of 20 minutes, and then gets caught with a spinning back fist, literally the only thing Pettis landed on him in the entire fight. Then he got ragdolled by Apache Mix, who just looked enormous. But then since then, he's been back in Rizin, and he banged out 2 on the trot, and then he fought Shinryu at Bellator Rizin 2. Eye poke ended it, so this was the setting things right. Now, Makoto Shinryu is going to be something special, probably. I described him in the lead up to this as having John Jones levels of talent making up for unforced errors. He makes unforced errors all the time. He's trying stupid spinning kicks. He's throwing kicks and getting them caught easily and falling over. But he's so talented and strong that he just stands up, or he scrambles through and throws the other guy down on their back. And he was 16-1 coming into this. And it looked like he was off to a pretty storming start. He immediately ragdolled Kyoji to the mat. Kyoji starts trying to wall walk and snatch the guillotine. And I was going, oh God, is that mythical ATT guillotine? I really hope he doesn't win with it, because that'll just reinforce Dustin Poirier's worst habits. But he kept trying to get up and then get the guillotine. He was using a great stockade grip, which is where you go over the head as if you're getting a guillotine, but you put your arm under, you underhook their far arm, which puts a bit of pressure on their neck, but it also, you can start using it to stand up or turn them over. And then a lot of the time what can happen is that they'll pop their chin up and you snap your hand back under and get the chin. So you can have not a very good guillotine grip, go to the stockade, start threatening to stand up or turn them over, and then their head pops up and you snap the guillotine grip back in place. And that's what Kyoji did. But yeah, the whole first round was just Kyoji trying to get up. And then Kyoji gets up, digs double underhooks, turns Makoto Shinryu onto the ropes, throws him down, and you're like, oh, this is where Kyoji takes over. And Shinryu just rolls him over. It's incredible. There's a beautiful foot sweep where Shinryu just rolled through and ended up on top. Every time Kyoji got good position on him and took him down, Shinryu just went, no, I'm getting up. And it was really impressive. His back was not flat on the canvas for a second in this fight. But Kyoji comes out at the start of round 2, and clearly his corner have told him, go and hit him now, because otherwise he's going to stick to you for the rest of the round. Kyoji comes out, throws a 1-2, dings him, wobbles him, keeps throwing the 1-2, doesn't really have an uppercut, and he isn't looking for it. So Makoto Shinryu keeps ducking and getting under Kyoji's punches. Then Kyoji goes to like his worst instinct from when he was back in Shuto. If you watch his Shuto fights, he doesn't fight like the weird karateka that he is. Back when he was starting out in Shuto, he was a huge fan of Kid Yamamoto, because he was training at Yamamoto's gym, and he just throws leaping left hooks the whole fight. So he tries that and he ends up missing and turning his back against Shinryu, and has to fight back from there. But basically, Shinryu finally slows down. Kyoji throws him past, gets on his back and chokes him. And it was really impressive, because Kyoji Horiguchi has gone from like the young guy who was thrown into the title fight with Demetrius Johnson too early to one of the older guys, you know, who's still doing it. I mean, obviously they got Takoro still rocking around in that division. Takoro did a surprisingly good job against Shinryu. I was watching that fight, and he's like entering legs. He's keeping the damage off him by threatening leg locks. And he's like 45 years old now. But in these lower divisions, Kyoji's 33, and 30, I think it's 34 or 35 has been like the death number for lighter weight champions. So it was impressive to do that. But Makoto Shinryu also looked really good, and I'm very excited for this lad's future. There's a whole gym of them. Him, the guy who won Road to UFC and is in the UFC now, who was just ragdolling everyone. And I think Tatsuro Taira might come from the same gym as well. Like, there's some monsters coming out of Japan at the moment, which is really encouraging, because watching Kyoji fight Hiromasa Ogakubo for a 4th time would not inspire confidence in the future of Japanese MMA. So rest of this card, Kai Asakura versus Juan Archuleta in the co-main. Oh my God, you know, people are excited to hear me shit on Juan Archuleta because I hate his style so much. It's so much movement and so little effective work. He's kind of like a Liam Prayer dressed up as TJ Dillashaw, because he trains with Dillashaw and he does a lot of side-to-side movement. But he does a lot of side-to-side movement and then he runs it on a straight line pumping hands. And that means that he's very readable. He doesn't ever show a feint. He doesn't get close enough to throw non-committal strikes. If you want to throw like a... So let's say like the jab is a great non-committal strike, because you're not even committing your feet. You're not... giving them the chance to grab a hold of something. You know, you could say like a teep or something in Muay Thai, because there's not much risk if you get bundled off your feet. But in MMA, the jab's a great example. So a jab, you have to be closer than like a long low kick to the lead leg, which is why everyone favors throwing calf kicks from a mile out. But if you get close enough to jab someone and you don't throw your whole body weight into it and you don't over rotate, you just poke it out there and then you bring it back as fast as possible and you stay in position. Or when you have it out there, you've got your lead shoulder high, you can leave it out there if you want. But it makes it very hard for them to counter cleanly. Especially if you're looking at them, you're close enough, and you're playing with the distance. You can throw a jab from not quite close enough, and they'll assume that you've done the work, and throw a counter back, assuming that you're close enough to jab them, so they must be close enough to hit you. Or you can get really close and crowd them a bit, and then start flicking them out, and they'll have a harder time seeing them. So it's a really good weapon to like play with someone's expectations. If you don't do that, if you never crowd someone, if you never get close enough to establish the jab or threaten the jab, or have another weapon like an inside low kick like Alexander Volkanovski, if you don't have a weapon that isn't a knockout punch that you can just build off and you can use to establish range and to be comfortable getting close enough to strike the guy, all you're ever going to do is run in on a straight line. And it makes you so readable. It's like playing poker, and as soon as you get a good card, you do a big smile and you look around the table. Juan Archuleta is the most readable fighter competing at this level of the sport. If you watch his fight with Sergio Pettis is a okay fighter. He's a good fighter. He's never been anything special. He's got some fun striking sometimes. He's got some fun grappling sometimes. But he's not, like, I wouldn't consider him championship material, typically, except for that one back fist he landed on Kyoji Horiguchi. He fought Juan Archuleta when Juan Archuleta was the Bellator, what are we talking about, bantamweight champion. Juan Archuleta runs around in a circle and then jogs in on a line at him over and over again. And Sergio Pettis slides back, as in like right foot, left foot, just move back, and he throws the right hand at the same time. And every time Juan Archuleta drives his own face onto the counterpunch, and he never learns and he never changes it. That was like 3 fights ago for Juan Archuleta. He ran onto the same counter from Kai Asakura about 10 times. And then he ran onto a counter knee, because he never plays with anyone's expectations at all. It's always exactly the same shit. It's running in on a straight line, pumping hands, and then ducking on a takedown attempt. And then when he gets a clinch, he might jump up for a jumping knee, which is cool. I remember writing about that years ago and be like, oh, that's quite cool. But he doesn't finish any fights and he doesn't do anything interesting. And the best case scenario for him is to hold the guy down. So that was why I don't enjoy him. But then he missed weight by 6 pounds. And, you know, he was sent over by Bellator because they couldn't be bothered to send anyone decent. You know, it was like, because they couldn't be bothered to send any of their actual champions who might lose. So they sent him over, and he's won these 3 boring-ass fights and won a title in Rising. And I think one of them was a sketchy decision, but you're going, like, how have Rising got themselves into the position where they're having to book Juan Archuleta as like an attraction when he's antithetical to everything that they love about MMA? But worse than that, like his last fight, he fought Oga Kubo, who, you know, he's Japanese, so there's a little bit of Japanese fandom for him, but is a chronically boring fighter. He takes people down and lays on them, and he has, I think, like 5 finishes in a 40-fight career. Never hurt anyone with a strike ever. So that fight between the two of them is just like, how do you make Oga Kubo look like the more dangerous fighter in the matchup? Archuleta managed. But yes, if you're not following Kai Asakura, you probably should be. He's one of the most exciting bantamweights in the world. And could probably make flyweight. He's 1-1 with Manel Cup. He's 1-1 with Kyoji Horiguchi. He just smoked Juan Archuleta, who's one of the top 5 in Bellator. And he's just a really exciting fighter. He goes forward, he throws hands, he's got great counters, and he hits the body constantly. He goes 2-handed flurries to the body. He knees the body a lot. In fact, his last 2 wins are by knee to the body. If you didn't see it, there was a video I did for the channel called 5 Things I Learned, or 5 Cool Things from Kai Asakura versus Yuki Motoya. Just search Kai Asakura on my YouTube channel. It was a decent fight between 2 sort of top-tier Japanese bantamweights, and Kai Asakura, the finish came from an over-under clinch, or maybe he had double underhooks, but Motoya tried to pummel his hand inside to take an underhook, as you do, and Asakura turned his palm up and brought his elbow in, like you're showing someone something that's in your palm, which caught the whole of Motoya's forearm up to the elbow in place as he was pummeling his arm back in, and kept his elbow away from his body. So on that same side, Kai Asakura lands a knee to the body and scores the knockdown in the finish. If you haven't seen that, go watch it. It's very cool. He's just pummeling for position, and then he traps the arm in a sort of elbow out, like he's got a wing position, mid-wrestling exchange, and hammers the knee in on the liver. But this one, he just timed Archuleta running in, because Archuleta's always running in. Hit him with a right knee to the body. Archuleta collapsed, like all the air left him, and Asakura threw in some punches for the finish. I got to say, one of the things about JMMA is that there's a pageantry about it, which I do appreciate. The fireworks, the entrances, the taiko drums sometimes. Don't think they had taiko drums for this one, unless there was. I didn't see the opening ceremony, so it might have been on that. But there's always this pageantry. And the white of the ring is very cool, offset, and everyone's got different colour shorts. In Japan, guys wear cool shorts and have their hair in interesting ways. It's like if you watch J-Kick, guys don't have sponsors on their shorts. They just have interesting shorts that were made for them, like boxing. Well, they will have still some sponsors on their shorts, but a lot of the time they just have weird custom shorts. Look at Kid Yamamoto and Genki Sudo back in the day. Both of them had some bizarre shorts that they wore, and I don't think they had sponsors on. But it's part of your appearance. It's part of your brand. But some people like Japanese MMA for the soccer kicks and stomps. I like knees to the head on the ground. I have seen soccer kicks and stomps used in creative ways to pass the guard by someone like Shogun Hua. I wrote an article about that in Advanced Striking 2.0. Shogun Hua, go read it. And I wrote something about it at Fightland back in the day. And I remember my editor, we had a chat. He was like, do you like soccer kicks and stomps? And I was like, I can appreciate the artistry sometimes. The thing about soccer kicks and stomps is that it's very hard to soccer kick or stomp someone who's good and awake. Because this is the thing, like people watch Aljo do the stuff on his knees. People watch other guys like lay on their butt and they say, oh, have you tried that with soccer kicks and stomps? And you're like, go and watch Shinya Aoki. He did it. He literally butt scooted to people. And then when they threw a kick at his head, he'd lean back and try and catch him. Now it's dangerous, but he never got knocked out with a soccer kick. Got knocked out with some knees to the head by Hayato Sakurai by shooting a bad takedown and getting stuck in a front headlock, but that's a different thing. He literally butt scooted after Eddie Alvarez and heel hooked him. People don't understand, like, kicking someone on the ground if they're decent, you're taking risks. Like Vanderlei Silva against Hidehiko Yoshida. Knocked him down, stepped in with a big stomp, missed his head, or Yoshida moved his head because he wasn't unconscious, and immediately Yoshida swept him because you're giving them one leg. And if you really leap for it, you're giving them both legs. So the thing is that, like, against conscious opponents, they don't typically work. The horrible soccer kicks and stomp knockouts that you see are normally people following up on, like, an already well past it opponent. It's normally, like, there was a really bad one on this card. I can't remember the dickhead's name and I'm not going to look it up. But he scored a knockdown with a punch or a kick and then he hit him on the ground. And then as the ref's trying to dive in, he lands the soccer kick. It's like, I get nothing out of watching that. I think that's just shit. But you show me Mauricio Shogun Hua stand in Ricardo Arona ADCC Champions guard, part his legs with both hands, throw a stomp through the middle, miss, and then turn around and hammer fist him into unconsciousness from that position. That's cool. You show me Fedor throw Big Nog to the floor, step round his guard and kick him in the head in the first round of their third match. That's cool. You show me people head kicking corpses and I'm like, you could have done anything to him at that point. If sodomy were legal in the ring, you could have bummed him. It's just like trying to get away with as much gratuitous damage to the opponent as you can before the ref gets in. And there was another one on this card where, like, people were like, oh, add that to the soccer kick highlight reel. Who was it? I think it was maybe Kota Miura versus Koji Tanaka. I tweeted, like, after the fight, these lads weren't very good. But yeah, the guy just gets tired on the bottom and the other guy stands up and he doesn't move, so he gets kicked in the head like 3 or 4 times. It's like he was exhausted. Anything would have worked at that point. So yeah, soccer kicks and stomps still in a strange place for me. Knees to the head on the ground, still the best. There's like no reason we shouldn't allow them. Anything else good on this card? Kleber Koike Herbst beat Yutaka Saito, who's on like a 3-fight losing streak. God knows how he got this far up the card. First round was dreadful. Kleber Koike Herbst kicked him in the dick 3 times. But then he hit a cool sweep from Butterfly Guard and landed in top and darsed him, which was cool. I remember when I was writing those Prospect Watch pieces back in the day, Herbst was like one of the ones that I was really excited about. But he's never improved. Like he hit a double leg in this fight, which was okay, but so much of his style is laying on his back and throwing up submission attempts. And I'm looking at the UFC's featherweight rankings and going, okay, who would just sit on him for a 30-27 decision? And I got down to I was on Ranking MMA and I got down to 46, Frank Marshall. I could see Frank Marshall just sitting in his guard comfortably, chipping him with little elbows and winning the decision. And this guy was the rising champion until like a fight ago. But the dance was lovely. The sweep was lovely. You knew Saito was in trouble because when Herbst was locking up the dance or starting to punch it through from the vice grip, Saito was still trying to get him back in half guard. And it's like, at that point, that's gone. You know, the moment your arm is up by your neck across his body and he's locking his hands together, you need to ditch the leg. And there's some cool defenses to Darcy's. I think it was Malachi Friedman He had a guy training for a DAS specialist in, I think it was the UFC, and they did a ton of work on like specific DAS counters. But for most people, most of the time, if you find yourself in a DAS, belly down starfish, because they need to like crumple you up to finish the DAS, or turn you over. And if you just go like Greco-Roman parterre, do not engage. Go belly down. I mean, they could hit you, but they'd have to unlock their hands to do that. They could maybe knee you in JMMA, but you can put one hand above your head. You're belly down, and they could run around and try and mount you or something while you're face down, but they have to let go to do that. So it really is just like I'm not doing anything to better my position, but you can't finish that choke. But if you're trying to push them back into half guard and you get stuck in the half guard while their hands are locked in the DAS, you don't really have any answers because you can't turn belly down then. They're just going to sit on your leg. And it's an odd one because like a lot of people, when they get the DAS grip from the half guard, they want to pass the half guard and then run back towards your legs and hook the leg. But when you're in half guard, you have basically hooked your own leg for them. You've given up your means to belly down and escape, or belly down and take the pressure off. Right, good fight. Ren Hiromata versus Yaman, whose real name is Ren Sugiyama. But Yaman is an interesting one. He's an okay kickboxer who managed to convince, I think it's Rise, that they needed to do 4-ounce kickboxing. And you're like, it's pretty much the same as kickboxing, mate. I think you're just trying to make like a niche, and he has successfully made a niche. He's just a guy who throws hard and gets hit hard, and he's not terribly slick, whereas Ren Hiromata's pretty slick. Ren Hiromata has like this weird upright stance. He's got that sort of Joey Benavidez giant head, tiny body midget build, but he stands completely straight upright, like he's got a rod up his spine. And he steps back to his left and throws his left. He's a southpaw. Steps back to his left and throws his left hand as an open side counter. And he was nailing Yaman with that all night. People loved this fight because Yaman brought it, but Yaman lost basically every exchange, didn't land an awful lot. And then anytime that Ren Hiromata wanted to take him down, because this was an MMA match, not a 4-ounce kickboxing match, Ren Hiromata could take him down. They're both kickboxers, but Ren Hiromata, like I said, has been fighting MMA since 2020 and not gone back to kickboxing. So easy takedowns came in this one. And to Yaman's credit, he immediately just turned to his hands and knees and got up, which you can, by training grappling, you can overthink it and be like, there's more to it than that. And really there isn't. If you overthink, I think a little bit grappling is a very dangerous thing, because then you're like, well, I've got to recompose my guard, when really it's like, no, just try and get back to your feet and hope he doesn't choke you in the meantime. I did like Yaman looking for elbows from the clinch. He was turning his whole body so far that he was like looking the opposite direction at the completion of this elbow, and Hiromata was having to duck him. And that was new because obviously Yaman competes in kickboxing where elbows aren't allowed. And a lot of people think that elbows are illegal in Rising anyway, because they were always illegal in Dream and Pride. And I forget until someone lands an elbow that they're legal here. But it was a very fun fight, and I highly recommend you watch it. And then Seika Izawa, who is Japan Judo Lady Goddess. Not Judo Lady in the same sense that like Kayla Harrison and Ronda Rousey were. She wasn't that accomplished. But she's a judoka who came to MMA, and she has a really weird grappling style as a result. It's always fun seeing people like that who came from a different grappling sport that prioritizes different things, and then they go to MMA rather than trying to like become an ADCC champion. And she was fighting Miyu Yamamoto, Kid Yamamoto's big sister. An odd situation, because Miyu Yamamoto's main thing is that she's old and hot. I think I met her like a decade ago, but she's an absolute sweetheart, lovely woman. But she's fought on the same cards as her son. Her adult son fights on the same cards as her. Very impressive. If you go and find, there was one of the weigh-ins for one of her fights, and it's got like 1 million views on YouTube because people were like, "What? That's a 45-year-old woman." Yeah, can't get my head around it, because you're like, do you know what's great for anti-aging? 49 years of wrestling. Yeah. go and find anyone, I was going to say any man, but anyone ever who's done wrestling their whole life, and they don't tend to look good. They tend to like walk with a limp and be haggard and have cauliflower ears. But that's part of Miyu Yamamoto's appeal. If you've never seen the other Yamamoto sister, very glamorous woman. Married to, what's his name? Darvish, the baseball player in the US. And she was a 4-time wrestling champion, had a baby, took a year off, came back and won another title. She won bronze in ADCC on a whim. Like, she didn't know any grappling and she entered ADCC. It's one of those people that when you see them, you go, oh, yeah, there's a difference between like an athlete and just, a combat sports athlete who's just sort of like a tough person who's, there's a technical detail to fighting. But when you see like an NFL player or something like that, you go, oh, that's athleticism. Because I saw her cranking out like alternate chin-ups and behind the neck chin-ups for it must have been like 2 minutes she was doing that. I was like, what the fuck is that? So they're pretty special, this family. But Miyu Yamamoto's MMA career has not been stellar. She's never finished a fight. She won 6, and she was 6-7 when she came into this fight. She often gets submitted. She's kind of like a Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman style figure. Very strong wrestling, but once she gets you to the ground, there's a decent chance she gets finished from a position of dominance, as in like she's dominating. But she took down Seiki Izawa easily. What I really liked in this fight, Seiki Izawa's grappling very cool. Lots of cool front headlock stuff, which is interesting because that's not a judo thing. And that's in all her fights. She does interesting front headlock stuff. But she was getting taken down into guard, and what she was doing was using a grapevine. Grapevines are when you put your ankles in behind the opponent's ankles. So you have to, when they're in your guard, you have to pull them forward so that their butt is off their ankles. And it's easier to do on people who are trying to hold you down. A great example would be Rob Whittaker did it against Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero took him down, landed in guard. His butt was off his heels. So Rob Whittaker puts his feet in under Romero's ankles, grabs underhooks, uses the grapevines to pull Romero's legs out. So he's like sprawled out, and then swims his feet inside for butterfly hooks and sweeps his way up to his feet again. But it's a really good position because you can push the opponent's legs out. You put your ankles in behind theirs and you just straighten your legs, and they slide basically onto their belly onto you. But Izawa is using one grapevine, which is really interesting because if you use one grapevine, it's a method of turning yourself on your side. A lot of the time when you're turning yourself on your side, you're either pinching your thighs against the person and scissoring them so that you turn your hips out to the side, or you're putting a foot on them, or sometimes you're putting a foot on the floor and you're shrimping to turn onto your side. By using a single grapevine, you can turn yourself onto the side that you're extending the leg. So she did that, and she kept wrapping the head for a guillotine, and then she did a beautiful pass off from arm in guillotine. You can catch their wrist as they're defending it, push it down and throw your legs over for a triangle. Something that Ryan Hall used to do way back in the day. He taught that on like his first triangle DVD, and I used to do it all the time. And then I stopped because I was like, triangles suck, bruh. I can't submit people from the bottom. I'm not very good at it. I'm all about half guard underhooks now. But that was cool. And then what I really liked from Seiki Izawa, she was orthodox, Miyu was southpaw. So she's throwing right front kicks to the body and stepping in with a southpaw jab immediately afterwards. The old Machida brothers' favorite. And then when Miyu ducks in for the clinch, she's kneeing her. So she was hitting the body loads in the brief moments on the feet. Miyu shoots a bad takedown in the second round, ends up on a leg, sort of, in like a dogfight, and Izawa grabs the rear naked choke from there. It was identical to the finish of Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie 1. It was very slick, and I highly recommend you watch Seiki Izawa whenever she fights. If the UFC ever make an atomweight division, which they won't, but they should, she should be an easy acquisition. I mean, they've got loads of good women atomweights in Ryzen, because they do atomweight, and I think they do super atomweight as well. But atomweight has historically been a really good weight class for the women's divisions, and I say that as someone who's always ragging on the women's divisions. Atomweight and strawweight are the good ones. Flyweight is coming up; it's actually getting a little bit better, but for some reason the UFC were like the reason was Ronda Rousey, and the reason before that was Gina Carano, but it was like bantamweight's where people care about. It's like, no, that's where the bad fighters are. And featherweight for some reason, fucking hell. But I'm very pessimistic about them starting an atomweight division anyway, because Michelle Waterson was as close to she was very marketable. She's absolutely gorgeous. She has the Chun-Li kicks and the Chun-Li thighs. There was a press conference with the three women's champions, Paige Van Zandt and Michelle Waterson, and you were like, oh, I see what you're doing there. But she's been fighting up in weight for years. She's been way too small for strawweight, and she still fights there because the UFC offers her more money, obviously. And if they didn't start an atomweight class for her when it was so obvious that she needs one, I just can't see them ever doing it. Unless, I don't know, ESPN's like, keep giving us shit cards. We want more ranked contenders on cards. And they go, okay, we'll add another division. More ranked contenders. There you go. Then Mikao Ueda and Sudario had a fight. Ueda is a former Kyokushin world champion. big fat heavyweights, but he could kick. And I have always said I like a heavyweight who can kick, which is why I was excited for Nikita Krylov. But then he turned out to be a bust, because it turns out a lot of them put all their points into kicking and never learn anything else. And Ueda wasn't doing great, and then he landed a kick that was basically one of those ones where you throw up a high kick, but they step in, so they get the knee and the dome, and that scored him the knockout. Ogi Kubo, the world's most boring fighter, fought John Dodson, and it turns out John Dodson's forgotten how to MMA. Ogi Kubo took him down easily, over and over again, and then outstruck him in the second and third round, which was crazy. It wasn't impressive. I said it was like Strickland versus Adesanya in that not a lot's happening, but it is very funny. And you feel like there's stuff going on, even if there isn't an awful lot going on. And then the last sort of interesting fight from that card was Vince Morales versus Yuki Matoya. Yuki Matoya, decent Japanese bantamweight. Like I said, he had that great fight with Kaya Sakura. Very strong from the over-under clinch, gets the body lock and hits the outside trip. Every single fight. Couldn't hear. And Vince Morales was fighting like Victor Henry. It was all 1-2s into step-up front kicks or kicks with the ball of the foot with the lead leg. And he was throwing amazing volume, and he just kept doing it. Like he'd go 1-2-1 or 1-2 step-up front kick or 1-2-1 step-up front kick, just pumping hands and then punctuating it with his kick to the body. It was really taking it out of Matoya. And Matoya was just loading up more and more. And I was worried they were going to give Matoya the decision, but Morales absolutely deserved it, and he didn't. It wasn't even split. He just got the whole thing. So good for him. He came out of nowhere. I'd never seen him before. He climbs to 14-7. So he's been, he's not been the winningest guy in the world, but I was really impressed with him. So that was Rising, the last event of the year. Was it worth a watch? I think, yeah, it was. The Horiguchi Shinryu fight was really good. The co-main was fun because you had a real goodie and a baddie dynamic. And the other stuff was fun too, and Seiga Izawa, always worth watching. They'll end up on YouTube soon, I'm sure. Rising tends to upload a lot of their fights. But if not, you can buy it through Fight TV. I think it was like $12 or something. And you are then supporting an organisation that gives people options that aren't UFC. And it's not Bellator, which is great. But yeah, that gets us back in the swing of things. I had a good Christmas. Hope you had a good Christmas and New Year. And I'm going to recommit to my last year's resolution of just studying more combat sports outside the UFC and watching more up-and-comers and people that I don't know. Because I was thinking about who did I really like from this year of just making sure I know what's going on each weekend. And there were weeks where I let it slip a bit. If there was a big UFC pay-per-view, I wasn't really paying attention to stuff that wasn't going on then. But all those weeks that they were trotting out just garbage at the Apex, I was trying to see what else was going on in the wider fighting community. And I found some fighters that I really like from it. Right back at the start of the year, Subriel Matias, he stayed with me the whole year. Really, really fun in-fighter in boxing. Great combinations on the inside. Little tricks like that thumb up uppercut. I've had great fun watching the 4-ounce Muay Thai, Superlek. I mean, his fight versus Rodtang, he did come in massively overweight on purpose to bully Rodtang around, but he had a rough first round, and he really pulled it back with some lovely hand fighting. Basically just checked Rodtang's hands at every opportunity and countered. Beautiful kicking work, beautiful knee work. Superlek has fought like 5 times this year, and it's been really fun. He's replacing Rodtang against Takeru, which is so shady. Because apparently they knew Rodtang wasn't going to be able to make the fight, so they just made this fight for Takeru. They're lying to Takeru, and they're lying to fans to sell tickets. And then they're going to have Superlek swoop in, who is a completely different opponent. Just crazy. But what's his name? Tawanchai, great. I mean, even the guys like on the Friday Night Fight series, guys I wouldn't otherwise see, like Thongpoon, who's probably never going to win a stadium title or anything like that, never going to come through into K1 and be a superstar. But when you see Thongpoon, and you see him because he's got the Cumtown font Thongpoon tattooed across his chest, but he always brings fun, and it's one of those fights where you're just like, I know I'm gonna have a good time watching some Thongpoon. I know if I type Thongpoon into Google, I'm gonna have a great time. But J-Kick has been amazing fun. I found out about a load of guys, and then I found out about a load of guys who were even more surprising because they beat the guys that I thought were good. The Osaki brothers, Koki and Kazuki. Kazuki Osaki, terrific style, love him. Stays in people's faces, but fights on the counter there, quite often an offensive counterpuncher, which is one of the most difficult styles to operate in any combat sport. But like he fought something like 7 times this year. Hold on, I'm going to look it up. Oh, it was only 5, but in a tournament as well. And then Toki Tamaru came along and beat him, and Toki Tamaru has had an amazing 2023. 5 fights himself. Won the Rise under 54 kilos tournament, Really slick. If you want to see really good boxing, southpaw boxing with beautiful pivots in kickboxing, where pivoting can be quite tricky because you expose yourself to having your lead leg buckled when you by a kick if you get caught during the pivot. But yeah, he's wonderful. Watching him, the fight with Osaki was competitive, but if you watch how he was able to clip off Osaki's work and stop him doing more, because Osaki loves flurries to the body with his hands. The turning Tamara used in that fight, brilliant. The way he was throwing his left straight, so he was pulling his right shoulder back so he could throw his left straight in a really short space with some punch. Loved it. So many guys that I found in J-Kick that I love. There's that really old guy, what's his name? Fuck, I can't remember it. Yamato, maybe? Even in Crush, which is like off-brand K1, there was the trilogy between, what's his name, Stardust Lefty, Satomi and Osawa. I thought those were really interesting fights. In Bellator, obviously, you had the rise of Patchy Mix. I forget, Bellator was considered like quite mainstream, but a lot of people, if I do a Bellator episode, there's like 5,000 listeners. A lot of people don't know what's going on in Bellator. Patchy Mix, I mean, had a storming year, stood out. Rofian Stotts. Yeah, it's just been a really fun year. A lot of the funnest moments, a lot of the most interesting moments of the year were outside the UFC, and for me, at least. And I wouldn't have seen them if I hadn't made a commitment to try and watch more stuff outside the UFC and prepare for more stuff outside the UFC. I'm not just watching stuff outside the UFC. I'm trying to, before I talk about them on the podcast, previewing stuff, I'm trying to watch other fights from these people and get a grasp on who they are and how they match up. So that's, yeah, I mean, it's been a fun year. And it also, allowed me to sharpen my sort of, not scouting, because I don't really do any scouting, but, scouting of fighters. It allowed me to sharpen my working out how styles match up, because I've been doing an awful lot of reviewing cards and previewing cards, but only like the big fights. And, it's a skill. You've got to keep it sharp. So yeah, thanks for an awesome year. And of course, I couldn't do any of this without the support of my patrons and the boys. So yeah, thank you everyone. And on into 2024, where the first big fight is going to be we've got July announcement of McGregor versus Chandler at middleweight. Bloody hell. But the first big fight is going to be Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker 2. Let's get even sillier. But that's not until the 13th. So we'll do something different next week. I'm going to do the Slacky Awards this time next week, and I'll probably write something for the Patreon this week rather than do a boy cast. But I'll let you know. If you want to read the articles, get in on the extra podcasts and see the stuff that I do for the boys, sign up to the Patreon, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, including the recently unlocked How Sean Strickland Killed the King, head over to fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Nobuhiko Takada banging a drum in a nappy, bless.